Good morning and welcome to the Accessibility Workshop hosted by Digital Europe on the accessibility of e-learning solutions in crisis times. I am Jose Martinez, a Senior Project Manager at Digital Europe, and I will be the moderator of this workshop. As probably you know, the 95% of the higher education institutions opted for distant learning during COVID-19 crisis. Therefore, we have seen an exponential rise of e-learning solutions. However, we must make sure that the digital learning experience is inclusive to all students, regardless of their abilities, digital readiness, and also cultural background. Today, in our Accessibility workshop, we have several key speakers that will help us to better understand the accessibility of e-learning environments. What are the existing barriers and what are the possible solutions? Today, we have with us Loredana Dixie from the European Disability Forum, František Milan from Masaryk University, Susanna Laurin from Funka, and Radev Palisek from Tiresia Center. Let me explain a little bit the logistic, and then we will start with the workshop. Regarding the accessibility features provided, there is available English closed captioning that you can activate in the CC button in the lower part of your screen. There is also international sign language provided and interpreters that will be visible on the screens during the whole event. Regarding interaction during the workshop, please feel free to pose any question in the Q&A section. There is a button specific for that, also in the lower part of your screen. And the speakers will try to answer any question during the workshop. Also, we have at the end of the workshop, like 15 minutes for open questions from the audience. So you put your question in the question and answer, and then we will choose some of them to really address the question at the end of the workshop. And also feel free to share any resources, any comment, whatever in the chat. As you can see, the workshop will be recorded and it will be available in our Digital Europe website and also in the Accessibility Project website just after the workshop. So let's get started with the workshop, and let me introduce you Loredana Dixie. Loredana, since 2015, is membership, internal communication, and youth officer at the European Disability Forum. She's also doing voluntary work in an NGO called Views International that is developing European projects for people with a visual impairment. And today, Loredana is going to make a presentation on the end user perspective, really based on the key barriers that the students with disability are experiencing when interacting with e-learning context. So really, Loredana, we are looking forward to listening to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation, and it is an honor for me to be here today. I hope you can hear me well. So to introducing the topic, what I'll address today, I have a question for all of you. How many of you are using computer, phone technologies in a word now? You can, if you want, write in the chat or react in a way or in another using the reaction buttons. If you answer at this question right now, you can but use technologies, because today we are all together from different geographical positions of Europe, and maybe even from other continents. It is thanks to technology that we are all here together, sitting in our room at home or in an office, wherever we are. Whoever thought in the past that a student from a university in Belgium, for example, because I'm coming from Belgium now, can follow a course from a university in Vienna. And the credits received for that course are also recognized. That was even possible when I did my studies back in 2010. I finished a master at a university in Belgium. And then we already had the possibility to join courses that were given by other universities, but I haven't done it. Because it was new, I was afraid, is it going to be accessible? How will I do? E-learning, not for now. But in March 2020, from one day to the other, all was closed, frozen, I would even say. I must admit, I was afraid. What did students at school, colleges, universities feel like? Deadlines, timelines. Luckily, quickly, a shift to online was made quite immediately, at least at university levels. Then, let me say, the other level followed also of school. But how is it in practice to give lessons to children, little children like those who are studying? And I'm giving the example because I was speaking then with people a lot. So, for example, one of my friends who is a teacher in the school for the blind, she had to teach Braille to children who were learning at that moment. How did she manage to do so? It was quite difficult. But finally, yeah, we had to make with that, and things were installed. And what about students and what about students who are doing in special schools? In that case, at least in Belgium, there were two possibilities. There were two possibilities, and I remember one of my family members, a further family member, she has an autistic child who was in special school, and she said, yes, well, what am I going to do now? Because the choice was either that the child stays in school. For how long? She asked, the time of the lockdown, how long is that going to take? We know it was quite long, more than 1 month. And she chose not to leave him there because it was too hard. So then what about the support that child needed? I just told her, maybe it's like with the online cleaning, certain things can go well online, others not. And for sure, this was quite difficult. And then when people, they had to come back, then also it was quite complicated because some of them, they were afraid to join, or teachers were afraid to let them because they said they can't guarantee that there is no risk of contamination, or that they can keep the I don't like the word social distancing because it's in fact more physical distancing. So they can't keep the physical distance with the student, and it was how it was. And then in other schools there was even not options. So very important, crisis situations are coming fast. They are harsh. They are dealt with as it can be, and we are not included in that often. It takes time. And which are the barriers? that we are confronted with. I'm trying, hopefully I managed to move the presentation. Yes. Which are the barriers? The first one is access to technology, equipment. I know that all persons here have access to computer or to a phone because you had to join, and you have internet because otherwise you wouldn't be able to join. But how many people would have liked maybe to attend this meeting, but they are not here? Because first of all, maybe they don't have access to this and they don't know. So I know in Belgium, there was a lot, there were many actions to gather computers to be able to give it to people. And then, okay, maybe you have in your house, you have a computer, maybe you have one tablet, but in a family with 6 children, I can let you imagine how that is. And you need also to have at least as many rooms. If the children are in different classes or different levels of studies, how do you manage that also? So you need to have this technology and the logistic at home to be able to join those courses or to be able to study. Then how then regarding the classroom, of course, or the class, the next questions, teachers, students had, how is it going to happen? Well, how am I going to give my class? So many questions for them. Because it's certainly not easy. It's something they haven't done before. I remember one of my other friends who is blind, and her daughter was at school, and she proposed to the teacher, yeah, maybe you could do it via Zoom. And she said, yeah, I don't have the adequate training to do that. And it is understandable. And that's difficult to do it if you don't have this. So there were many, and students, yeah, how am I doing? How do I go, and where do I find my materials? How do I upload my works? How this happens? I know now at the universities, at least, this was already a technique that was used. People had to hand in, and they are using the online platforms of the universities to hand in work. They find materials even in my time. So there it was, they were more familiar with. Accessibility of the online platforms, because now maybe you were informed, and okay, fine, but can I work? Can I go on that platform? Am I able to go onto it? Do I know where to find the things? Is the video player, because my teacher sent me, I have to listen to a registration, a recording. Is that accessible? Can I play it? Is there subtitling available? Sign language? I don't know. So this have to be taken into account, because it was, we received quite some stories of such things. And this is very essential. If you want that learners with disabilities can follow, they need to have access to to this. Then, very important, financial and human support. Because, okay, you have the platform, you are able to go onto it, let's say everything goes perfect, but still, that little child learning Braille, that autistic child of my far family, they need support, someone next to them who shows them, who touches them, who explains them directly how to do certain things. So I'm coming back to the online cleaning, because that was my problem during the total lockdown. My cleaning service was not able to come, and I can do certain things, but not everything alone. So this was indeed, it's certain things you can do online, but not everything. And this need human support and financial. As I said, people need computers, people need equipment, people need these resources. Some of them, they had them available, but only at school. And the school would not give them at home, because there is an insurance. And this was available only in the school building. So that is a problem. It was a problem during the crisis, but not only, because even outside crisis period, this is very important to have, and it is a barrier that schools people meet, the lack of finance and human support. And I can tell you that also during this COVID crisis, like the available human support had to go in much more places than before. So they didn't manage to provide the services they used to provide to as many pupils and students, because they had to spend more time going from one place to the other. And so that was also a problem, a barrier that people had. And not forget that parents were also much more requested to be next to their children to help, and they had to do also their work in that time. Luckily, some measures were put in place that they could take special COVID leave to be able to support their children. But that also financially, it was less interesting than working the time you were supposed to work. Support and reasonable accommodation. Now, as I said, okay, the material, we have the platforms, the materials, the course, and these these are provided. But is my course, the material that I was put online, is it an accessible one? Does it have the navigation functions? Is that PDF document okay? Or is it a scanned, simply scanned a picture? I had many times during my studies such material. I hope they improved with time. Then, yeah, for my deaf friend, is there sign language available? The interpreter used to come on place. I know that we had quite some difficulties at EDF when we started the online meetings, because the sign language interpreters in the beginning, some of them were very easily, they switched to, but they were others that were hesitating, and they found it difficult, of course, like each of us, to adapt to. So it is important to make sure that whatever is provided, that multiple formats are available, that this is not a barrier for learners with disabilities, that sign language, that the psychological support, that the teacher, speech therapist, peripatetic teachers, that they are available, and this one can still go in person if that is necessary. Why do we need to remove these barriers? First of all, because it is a right. Because the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities clearly states that persons with disabilities have right to quality and to the same education as their non-disabled people. So this is essential. It is a right that I, you, anyone else, each of you in this virtual room have the right, and all around you. And I am going to leave you to discover everything that the convention says about that and how it documents, because it's very important. So, as I said, so we need to treat each of our learners in an equal way. And that this is very important. And then all EU member states have signed these conventions, and even the EU, and they ratified it. So they are legally binded to do this. And then why also it is very important? Because the figures speak. Let me tell you that more than, so it is, you have 10% and something, 10% of school leavers without disabilities. And do you know that in the community of persons with disabilities, it is 20.8% of school leavers? These figures need to go down. And this is possible. This is possible if people, they think that it is a right, that people have the right to equal education. They can do, they can also intervene if they provide the necessary investment that the nation, the ministries, that all countries provide the necessary financial support, that the services are offered and are put in place to help learners with disabilities to get equal opportunities with their peers. And that they are supported in all processes to be learners like all the others, because we are all part of this society and we can improve if we work together. Thank you so much, and I'm waiting for your questions.
Thank you, Loredana, for your great presentation. I have a question for you. Really, what are, according to your opinion, the key advantages of online education for students with disability? You can just point out 2 or 3 things.
First of all, of course, you can do it whenever and wherever you want. So you can work out how you do it. These constraints are not anymore present, and that's fantastic. I think this, for me, it is the main advantage. You know, I have migraines, and sometimes maybe I have difficulties to wake up one day because of my headache. So I take the medication, I can stay in bed and then go later and follow that course or do that task. And this was so helpful when I could do that. I followed also online 1 week a language course, and that was fantastic for sure. And then people, they can choose the method they are providing the results. So the result is the same, but they can choose the method and when and how. I think this is for sure one of the most important.
Thank you, Loredana. Please stay with us until the end of the workshop because we will have 15 minutes open discussion with the attendees. Okay, many thanks, Loredana.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to have you as a speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank
you. And now we move to a super interesting man, is František Milan. Hi, František. Hi. I'm super happy to, to have a conversation with you again. How is life at the university?
First of all, let me thank you, the organizer for this event. It's my great pleasure to be part of these presentations. And now I have to say that I always enjoying my studying at the Masaryk University, no matter if it is online or it is in a real way. So definitely I like being part of such a great community at Masaryk University.
Mm-hmm. But František, let me introduce you to the audience. František is a student of Chinese language and culture at Masaryk University, and he loves doing hand cycling in the summer. And today, really, František is going to provide us with a testimonial of a specific case of a typical student with some kind of barriers using e-learning platforms during the COVID-19 pandemic situation. So, František, as we have a call before, just to prepare a little bit your intervention in this workshop, I'm going to pose you like 3-4 questions, I think. The first is, during the COVID-19, you were using distant learning and e-learning platform, but to you, what were the main barriers that you experienced doing e-learning?
Well, as you may know, Chinese language is very challenging. First of all, it's a tonal language, so the tones in Chinese during Chinese speakings are very important. So when you have online class, you have to listen your teacher's performance really carefully to know the tones of his or her speech. There are four tones of every Chinese syllable, and every tone is important because it changed the meaning of the Chinese word. So it was very challenging, especially when the connection of the internet is not very sustainable, or it's not perfect. Then you have really great trouble to listen your teacher carefully. And the second thing, which is very important, is that Chinese language, written language, has so many characters, and you have to distinguish them. So it is very important for me to have a clear studying materials, because when I am looking at some documents, maybe it's a bit hard for me to read it, especially because of my sight problem. So many times I have to make the materials bigger, make them bigger, and the front of the text needs to be more clear for me. And you know, in a Chinese there is very every stroke order of the character is very important, so you need to be really careful when you look at the character and you distinguish them. And the third thing which was really barrier was that I like personal communication with a teacher when you really don't have when you have really personal contact with them and you can talk to them freely. Of course, you can talk to your teachers online, but I like personal contact, so I was really missing the personal contact during COVID and the hardest period.
Yeah. Francesca, can you explain us what kind of assistive technologies you use? Because it will make us understand better what are your barriers and how you use the internet and how you use the e-learning platform.
First of all, there are many Chinese dictionaries which are available online, and they have many functions. Most of them are available for me freely, but what is challenging for me is, for example, the function of handwriting in the online dictionary. So when you want to find the character, you can use your hand to write it down, but it is very sensitive, so you have to be really careful when you write down the character on such a platform. But on the other hand, there is a Chinese keyboard input, which is very useful. It is based on a pinyin transcription of Chinese characters. So every student can download this platform of Chinese keyboard and type it down on the computer. This is a big advantage for me, as I have also a problem with handwriting. Of course, at the beginning of my studies, I really have to be careful when I was write down something by hands, and it was very challenging to pass this kind of handwriting exams. But now I am allowed to use computer for writing Chinese characters. So this is really good at this point. And
Francesca,
fortunately, is easily accessible.
You are super talkative. Everybody will discover that we have several conversations before. But let me summarize. If so, you are using a keyboard that is helping you to write Chinese character, but also you are using a screen magnifier sometimes, no?
Yeah.
Okay, something else? Any other assistive technology?
I also sometimes use Chinese screen reader. So it's like you use it when you want to read the characters from the screen. You just put your mouse on the character, and it will pop up the meaning, and the word will show up. Also the translation.
And another question, is your university supporting you in this process of adapting to e-learning let's say, environment with technology, giving you extra time for the exams? I don't know, giving you larger funds when you need it? Do you receive support?
Definitely, I receive as much support as it is possible, and I am always guarantee to have the best technical solution when I have a problem. I just ask the Center of Theresias to find a solution for me, and I'm always sure that they will do the best to help me, and to help me in the way that is really not making advantage of my disability, but I'm always sure that the help was meet the requirements of my study. So I feel equal to non-disabled students when I am studying. So it's definitely very good to have them in the university.
Yeah. Well, we will have a member of Tiresias later explaining how they work at the university. And really the last question is, what do you prefer, the e-learning environment where you can do more or less everything alone and you have some assistive technologies and some tools to manage the whole learning experience online, or going to the university, see your friends, go face-to-face classes, etc.? So can you put one or two advantages and disadvantages of this kind of learning according to your experience?
Okay, so definitely I like the learning face to face. It's more accessible for me, and I like it. As I said, I like the face-to-face connection with my friends and teachers, because I think the communication is much easier. But when I want to talk about advantage of online learning and online platform, I definitely want to say that I like the connectivity of online world. For me, as a student of Chinese, thanks to the softwares and online platforms, I still can stay in touch with my friends from mainland China, as well as to chat with my friends from Taiwan. And of course, it is really good that so many events were switched to online, because I cannot imagine to attend physically all of them. And now I'm really enjoying the moment when I can contact with someone from the other part of the world. I really like it.
Very good, František. This is really all the question that I have for you. You have illustrated very well the experience of a student during the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Please stay with us until the end of the workshop, because we have 15 minutes for open question of the audience, and probably some of our attendees would like to pose you a question.
Okay.
And another thing, I know you love hand cycling, and you are invited to come to Madrid to hand cycling, and so we can cycle together.
Okay, it will be my pleasure.
It will be mutual pleasure, František. And now we need to, thank you. We need to move on with the agenda. Sorry. And go to Susana. Our next speaker is Susana Lauring. She is the Chief Research and Innovation Officer and former CEO at Funka. Funka is a European market-leading accessibility consultancy from Sweden. And she is also the chair of the ETSI Sensen-elect e-accessibility joint working group that is leading the work of the European accessibility standardization. I guess the sign language interpreter will be crazy with all this. But she is also the International Association of Accessibility Professional Representative to the EU. And currently, Susanna is leading the review of the Web Accessibility Directive on behalf of the European Commission. And for many years, for more than 20 years, she has been a leader in the field of accessibility and inclusion. Today, Susanna is going to make a presentation on the European perspective of e-learning, what are the standards, the relevant policy and the regulation. And Susanna, really the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jose. And let's see if I can now move the, oh, we tried this before, and now I can start. So, yes, thank you for having me. Thank you, Jose, for this opportunity to talk about the EU level regulations. So really, to summarize this in 10 minutes is quite difficult, but if we look at the overall view, the digital accessibility in the EU is based always on the UN CRPD, the United Nations Convention of the Rights of People with Disabilities. So that is kind of the well, you could call it the baseline or the umbrella, but it's really what all the accessibility works is stemming from. And then the European Commission has something called a disability strategy. So that is usually, it's a way of making sure the policies are following the UN CRPD and also making sure that all the initiatives and activities are moving in the right direction, so to speak. So the current disability strategy is quite new. So we don't really know exactly which of the flagship initiatives will be most successful, but it's a very interesting read, and it's also not a very long document. So if you're interested in the policy of accessibility in the EU, I would recommend you to read the disability strategy, because that is really a good summary of all the initiatives. The strategy contains research and legislation and also other activities. So it's actually on all different levels. When we look at the legislative actions that have been taken in the last couple of years that affect the e-learning ecosystem most, it's really the procurement directive that has added another layer of accessibility requirements to public procurement. And then it's the Web Accessibility Directive, which covers public sector bodies and also other organizations governed by public law. And then in 2025, we will have the European Accessibility Act, which is a directive, even if it's called an act, that covers certain products and services. So with these three directives, we have quite a broad approach to digital accessibility in the EU. These are not all the legislations, but some of the most important ones. So if we start with the Web Accessibility Directive, this is a directive that covers all public sector bodies in all EU member states, and it's a minimum harmonization directive, which means that you cannot go below the directive. You need to do the minimum requirements of the directive, but the member states are also entitled to go beyond the directive, and 7 member states are actually doing more than what is required by the directive, which I think is very, very interesting. And in the directive, there is an opt-out possibility, so you can take things out of the directive when it comes specifically to schools, kindergartens, and nurseries. And this is not because the Commission doesn't think that the educational system is important, but rather that these part of society are very much regulated already in the member states. So not to have conflicts between national legislations and the EU legislations, there is this opt-out possibility. And Unfortunately, this means that, oh, pushing the wrong button, sorry. Around half of the member states have used the opt-out possibility for schools, which means that we have in kind of half of Europe, we have the same requirements for schools and kindergartens and nurseries. And in the other part of Europe, we have national regulations and national standards. And this means that it's not harmonized. And when it's not harmonized, that means that it's more difficult for the market to provide solutions that work everywhere. It's also more complicated for the teachers who choose e-learning systems or apps or things like that. And it's also more complicated for the students because they don't know exactly which requirement is on the table in which country. So this is a pity and something that I hope that the review of the Web Accessibility Directive will be able to look into further and hopefully encourage the member states or make the Commission do a better job in the next generation of the directive, so that we make sure that we have the same minimum requirements in the whole e-learning system. When it comes to the next act, the next directive in Europe covering all the EU member states, it's called the European Accessibility Act. And sometimes this is presented as the legislation that covers the private sector. And I understand where that's coming from, but it's not entirely true because it doesn't cover all private sector. And really in this directive, it doesn't matter what kind of organization is behind. If it could be public, non-profit or commercial, that is not the distinguishing factor here. So the European Accessibility Act covers certain products and services, and they cover the whole value chain from manufacturer to importer to sales and distribution and so on. So it doesn't matter what you do with the product or service, but as long as you kind of touch it in its way from the industry to the user, you are obliged to comply with the regulations. This directive is now being transposed, which means that it's implemented in each of the member states. And the member states need to have their national regulations in place before the 28th of June this year. So we are now looking very eagerly to all the member states and see how they handle this directive. It is a little bit complex and it covers many different sectors in society. So there are loads and loads and loads of actors that need to follow this directive. When it comes to e-learning, the most important parts of this directive is that computers and operating systems, smartphones and tablets, ebooks and e-readers are covered by this directive. So that means that the companies producing these items, the companies importing them, distributing them, providing them, they need to comply with this directive in all EU member states starting 28th of June 2025. So in 3 years' time, all of these things need to be accessible. And this will, of course, have a huge impact on training and schools and e-learning system in Europe when this happens. It's very interesting because, as you probably know, many of the companies behind ebooks, e-readers, computers, smartphones, and so on are not European companies. But if they want to sell their products and services in the EU, they need to comply with the regulations. So this is how the EU is actually, the legal system of EU is also affecting and impacting companies and organizations outside of the EU, which I think is quite fascinating. So having a look at the European standards, it's important to understand that an EU regulation or directive on accessibility needs to point to European standards. In the legislation, it's written who is covered by the directive and what is covered by the directive, but it doesn't say exactly how. For the how, I mean, how we define what is accessible, what is needed for a computer or an e-reader or a bank to become accessible, the so-called presumed conformance, that is the technical specifications of what does it mean to be accessible according to this legislation. That is always defined in a standard. That is very clever, because if you for a while look at the US, the reason why their legislation is not moving forward is that they wrote the technical specifications inside of the law, and it takes a lot of time to change a law. So they are pointing towards, they're really backwards pointing, and now pointing to standards that are outdated since long. In Europe, this is done in a more clever way. The legislation takes time, absolutely, but that only covers who and what. The how is covered in European standards. This means that we need to create our own standards called EN, European norms, to provide the presumed conformance or the minimum requirements of the directives. Sorry. So for a long time, there has been a European norm called 301549, which is covering products and services. And this standard is the minimum requirements of the Web Accessibility Directive. When it comes to the European Accessibility Act, all these three ENs will be important to show compliance. So we have the EN 301549, the good old EN that most of us know from before. We also have the EN 17161, which is more of a procedural standard, helping you to do the processes when you produce or develop or design a product or service, then how to make sure that the end result is accessible. This standard supporting you to have kind of a method of working called Design for All methodology. So this standard is supporting companies and organizations in how to work, how to make sure that their day-to-day business is put together and made in a good way so that the end result becomes accessible. And the third standard that we are going to update to fit with the European Accessibility Act is the EN 17210. And that standard covers requirements for the built environment. So all these three standards, plus some technical specifications, technical reports that are needed of an update, are going to be covered in a new mandate. And the European standardization organizations are going to make sure that these three EN standards are updated or refined or rewritten even to fit with a new legislation. And this is of course very valuable, because then we have the same requirements for the Web Accessibility Directive and the European Accessibility Act. And we know that it covers all the requirements needed for these two directives. So that is something that is going to happen starting hopefully this spring, and that we will work on all the way until the 28th of June 2025, most likely, because it's a little bit delayed in the starting point. And as you may know, standards are usually created from a kind of a bottom-up perspective. Either there are user organizations that require a standard, or there are industry organizations that think they would benefit on having the same standards. But these standards are mandated, which means that the Commission is requiring, or asking rather, the standardization organizations to address this need and develop new standards or update old ones. So that is the difference between kind of the usual standards and the standards that are connected to the legislation. So it is interesting that today in the digital arena, I would say that the EU is leading the way. Not only do we move faster when it comes to the technical specifications, if you again look at the US, many people still think that the US is the leading country when it comes to accessibility. They are still pointing to WCAG 2.0, which is a global standard that was published in 2008. So we didn't even have smartphones at that time. But with the way we are doing this in the EU, the legislation can move in its slow path, but the standards are regularly updated, which means that we can make sure that the standards are pointing to relevant technology and that we are using the new emerging technology to solve accessibility problems. The other perspective of EU leading the way is that the EM 301-549 standard that both I and also actually Jose has worked on for many, many years is now not only used in the EU, but also in many other countries. It has been used for legislation in Australia, in Kenya, in Mexico. We are now in discussion with several Asian countries looking into this, and also Canada is planning to use the EM 301-549 in their procurement legislation. So I think we should be proud of the work done at the EU level here, because we are really showing that it's possible to get together and collaborate industry, public sector, private sector, NGOs, TPOs, experts, and work together to create standards that make sure we have a harmonized market and that users and market players alike know what the requirements mean, and make sure that we can provide the same level of accessibility to users in all EU member states and beyond. So that's what I had today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you for the great presentation. I think you are the only European person who can explain legislation and the standard on accessibility in a way that everybody can understand. I have a question for you. Really, it's about the European Accessibility Act, and what, according to your opinion, the implications of the future entry into force of this act for the e-learning sectors, and in particular for the technology providers?
It's a huge shift, I would say, because for most of them hasn't experienced any requirements or regulations on accessibility before, or very few. So it will be easier for the industry players because we will have the same standards in all countries. So that is good for the inner market. It's easier if you can sell the same product or service in all EU countries. But I don't have statistics, but my gut feeling is that the majority of them really need to start working on improving their accessibility. At least the market that we know, which is mostly in Western Europe, the e-learning systems, the learning management systems, and other pedagogical tools, and especially all of the apps, they are not accessible at all. So they have 3 years, but they need to start getting their act together now. This will be a learning process, and something they will need to look into in a very serious way. On the other hand, when they are finishing that work, when they have trained their staff, and when they have made sure that their development and design processes take accessibility into account, then their products and services will be better, and they will be more useful for much more people. So that is, I think, an investment that as soon as they are aware and understand this, it's a great potential also for selling to more clients.
Yeah, exactly. And this is one of the objectives of the accessibility project, really, is to raise awareness regarding the accessibility of ICT products and how beneficial it is to invest in accessibility to reach a bigger market. So thank you, Susanna. We need to move on with our next speaker. I see you again in the debate part of the workshop in 15 minutes. And then our last speaker is Radek I don't know how to pronounce your surname, Radek. Pavlisek, I think it's like that. So Radek is an accessibility and assistive technology expert with more than 20 years experience. He has been working at Tiresia Center at Masaryk University. It's the same university as František is studying Chinese. And since 2012, he is a senior accessibility specialist, also project coordinator and event manager. So Radek is going to make a presentation on the strategies to address the impact of COVID-19 pandemic situation on e-learning and explaining really the case of the Masaryk University, because he is like coordinating the accessibility support center there. Radek, are you ready? Yes. So the first is yours, Radek. Can you let us know how to pronounce your surname?
Sure, I can. Hello, everybody. My name is pronounced in Czech as Radek Pavlíček. Pavlíček. Okay. That's the right pronunciation, but you did well. Pavlíček is also understandable, I would say. Thank you very much for the invitation. And since we usually need a week to introduce our activities, so let's move on and start with my presentation, which will be mostly a set of, let's say, sharing of examples and good practices, mostly because of time I have for this. As in many cases, also at my university, the digital transformation was not led by CEO, CTO, rector, or vice dean, but it was led by COVID-19. Our university is called Masaryk University, as was said. It's located in Brno, and it's the second largest university in my country. There are about 5,000 staff members and 32,000 students. So just to provide you a picture how big our university is. As for our center, it was founded in 2000, and it's the largest support center for students with special needs in my country. We have more than 100 staff members and currently registered about 550, 600 students, and František is of course one of them. And thank you, František, very much for your kind words regarding the support we provide you during your studies. So now back to year 2020 when the COVID pandemic started, and just let me give you an example how big the shift or the movement from the built environment to the digital one was. The main platform for collaboration at my university is Microsoft Teams. And in 2020, in January, there were about 300 users. In December 2020, there were 33,000 users. So you can see that it's a really huge increase in terms of number of users from 300 to 33,000. And this was not the only thing we did have to face. There were many things which were mentioned beforehand by František or Loredana. So just a brief, let's say, overview. One of them was the rapid growth of distance and virtual education, and loss of physical contact, increase in self-study. Most of the students were provided materials for self-study and just for themselves. We also faced issues with unsuitable study or work environment, as was, for example, described by Loredana. Then people moved from spacey classrooms to their homes, to their flats, and they had to study there. And of course, there were many changes from the established fixed order. And as you remember, this all happened like from day to day. So there was like almost no time for adaptation. Measures were announced by the government, and university was closed after 1 or 2 days, and everything and everybody was moved to the digital world. What we have to address? There were many things, and again, just I will just give you a couple of examples. One of them were technical aspects. So you can imagine that there were diversity and variability of platforms and systems. Some teachers used Zoom, some Microsoft Teams, some shared materials, which were in PDF, some of them in PowerPoint, and so on. So there were many issues regarding the technical aspects, also regarding the audio and video quality during the lessons, which were organized in a digital environment, and so on. Regarding organizational aspects, there is one thing which I would like to mention. As Susanna said, in some countries, the Web Accessibility Directive is not, let's say, transformed in a full scope regarding schools. Unfortunately, this is also the case of my country. But fortunately, we have a very clever management, and there is a rector's directive regarding the accessibility of study at Masaryk University, which goes far beyond what's written or what's Web Accessibility Directive asks for. So fortunately, we can use this directive in a case when we need to answer why to the question, why should I do this? So there is this rector's directive, which can be used very easily. And one thing which is not mentioned so often is that we also have had plenty of work regarding the situation in the field of international student mobility. It means that we had to support students from abroad who were studying at Masaryk University during the COVID pandemic, and vice versa. We also had to support the students studying abroad, for example, with helping them to come back to the Czech Republic and so on. So this was also a lot of work that had to be done regarding this aspect. How we did this? As I said, we usually need 1 week to introduce all of our activities and services, since you can imagine that the Theresia Center is a sort of a university. At university, we are, let's say, shadowing and supporting all processes regarding studies. So we have, for example, our own student study department, ICT department, and so on. So it's quite hard to explain this just in a couple of minutes. So I would like to show you an example of 2 projects which are addressing the inaccessibility of e-learning, since this is one of the strategies we started with. It means to be part of projects which do something for addressing this issue. The first project is called IEDA, and its outcomes are basically free. There are 3 outcomes. There are two curricula. One of them is for training on methods and approaches to teaching persons with disabilities. The second one is on the application of assistive technologies, since this is something what it's also very necessary. And the last outcome is a comprehensive handbook on the integration of persons with disabilities in a non-formal education. Of course, all of these materials will be published and available, so everybody can make a use of them and use them during their practice. The second project is called eTeachers, and its outcomes are basically these. The first one is analysis of needs and requirements regarding the digital inclusion competencies for higher education. So it means that we ask the teachers and staff members what they really need regarding the digital inclusion. The second outcome is a collection of relevant open source, open educational resources, since of course we are not the only ones who deal with this. So there are many other very good and excellent resources regarding this. So the aim is to gather them and to provide them as and let's say an outcome of this project. The third one is online accessibility toolkit for inclusive digital education. This should be a very practical thing based on the requirements from the first outcome, and the last outcome are the practical guidelines on how to foster inclusive digital higher education. For those who know me, you know that I'm, let's say, very practical and pragmatic person. So I'm glad that these projects are, let's say, on the same wavelength, and we focus mostly on practice. We are in a, let's say, close touch with in close contact with those who should be affected by these outcomes of these projects. We of course focus on usefulness. We'd like to have this material as useful as possible. Also, raising awareness is very important because despite all the effort regarding accessibility, we know that in many cases the awareness is not so, let's say, big as it should be. And the last one is education. We are talking about the accessibility of education, but we can succeed only if we educate those who will educate the others. And we need, let's say, we need teachers who will know and who will have sufficient competencies regarding accessibility and inclusion. So that's all from me. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now or during the last session, during the last Q&A session, or you can drop me an email, and I am happy to share our, let's say, or my knowledge or the outcomes of the projects with you. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of this workshop.
Thank you, Radek. But before you go, I have a question for you. Now that COVID-19 seems to be ending in most of the European countries, what do you have in mind for the future? Because this has been a real challenge for your university and your unit. But what are you planning for the future? Any other measures for other crises like the Ukrainian one, or what do you have in mind?
At first, I would say to finish the project I mentioned during my presentation, of course. And we would like to take the good things we have learned during the COVID pandemic. And I would, let's say, mention two of them. The first one is that we have already started with organizing hybrid events. It means that there is no need for people to travel to join in person, but for those who are not able to be in person on the spot, so they can join remotely, and they can be with us. So this is one thing which I would say we polished during the past 2 years, and now we are able to provide, I would say, very accessible hybrid events as well. So that's what we'd like to offer more, since it gives us an opportunity also to attract partners and participants from abroad. So the impact is much bigger than in comparison to organizing an in-person event in Brno. And the second one is to be, let's say, more active on a field or in a field of accessibility regarding Web Accessibility Directive and European Accessibility Act, since we know that this is now it's the right time to catch the train, and we have started a project in January this year, which focuses solely on activities regarding the accessibility of digital environment. So these are, let's say, to be like more concrete. So these are two things which we would like to emphasize more during this year.
Yeah. Thank you, Radek. By the way, you have already a question from Alia Chahin in the question and answer section regarding the two links of the two projects that you have mentioned. If you can answer, that would be perfect. And then let's move for all the participants. You can post your question in the question and answer section. We have two questions. I have asked Radek to really answer the ones of the links regarding the project, but we have another for Susanna Lauring. So Susanna, the question is, could you give a practical example of how e-learning providers need to be more accessible?
So yes, thank you for the question. So in the countries where the Web Accessibility Directive is not taken out of the scope, so parts of Austria, mostly Belgium, some parts of Germany, Spain, Slovakia, Poland, Latvia, the Netherlands, I can't really remember all of them, and I think Italy as well, and Ireland. So 12 or 13 of the member states, there the e-learning, everyone who is selling e-learning to public administrative or funded or managed schools or systems or universities, I mean all everyone who wants to sell to public sector in this country need to comply with the EN 301-549 requirements of Annex A, which is a long answer. But in reality, it has to do with maximizing the foreseeable use, so that if you are providing, for example, video, it needs to be captioned. It also, if you're showing text in the video, it needs to be audio described. And if you are providing images, that needs to have alternative text. If you're providing text, you need to make sure that it's understandable, and so on. So it's the ordinary web accessibility requirements, and then a couple of additions in the EN from clauses 5, 6, 7, and 12. So, but those are some examples. If you provide material where you need vision, then you need to have an alternative for people who are vision impaired. If you provide audio, then you need to have an alternative for people with hearing problems, and so on. So that's some examples of what needs to be covered.
Thank you, Susanna. I hope this answer is okay for Alia. And I have a question for Loredana. The question is, you have been presenting the main barriers of the e-learning environments, but do you have any rough estimation on the cost from moving from a non-accessible online course to an accessible one? Because for many, many years, we have been working on the cost of accessibility of website, the impact assessment for the Accessibility Act, etc., etc. So could you give us some ideas on this?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question. So what I would say, certainly, you can count at least as much as when you are preparing not an online course, because the preparation time, the investment of both teachers and all the logistic is at least similar. So I would say certainly not less. I don't have a rough estimate. I'm sure that our friends here from the universities will have concrete figures on that, but that's my advice. Budget accessibility, budget sign interpretation, budget multiple formats to make sure you don't leave anyone behind. Thank you. I hope this helps.
Thank you, Loredana. Yes, it's very clear answer. We need to quantify that in money, but yes, it is at least you have a granular idea on how to quantify that. And then really, we do not have much time, but I would like to pose another question to Susanna, that really many of us, we have been working in law and standardization for years, and we all know that this is super slow process. It seems that in the last 5 years, everything seems to speed up a lot. But how do you see the sector of ICT accessibility in Europe by 2030?
Looking into the future is always difficult. Is this recorded? Because I will probably be wrong, whatever I say. No, but I really, no, seriously, I see a huge uptake of accessibility knowledge. We have the industry association, IAAP, certifying professionals in accessibility. That is really raising. Many more people are doing that. We have some of the European member states, they require certification when they procure accessibility specialists. And I think it's extremely important that you can prove that you have the skills and experiences and knowledge to be an accessibility expert. But we do see two things. We see generalist ICT companies are training and certifying their staff. So they are kind of adding accessibility as another part of the competence they need to have in their offering. So they have developers, designers, UX designers, graphical designers, and now also accessibility people and testers. So that is, I think, what will be the biggest push. We also see, and this is especially reported from the monitoring agencies in all the member states, that they see an increase also in smaller accessibility specialist companies. So when you really need the kind of cutting edge expertise on accessibility, that market is still very small, but it's growing exponentially. And just as a comparison, we see in our own numbers in Funka that we have statistics since more than 20 years. And for 18 or so of those years, we had public sector bodies were like 97% or something of our clients, and the rest was mostly disabled persons organizations. And nowadays, more than 30% of our clients are industry organizations that are ICT companies. So they need to learn accessibility to be able to sell their products on the market. And I think that is, I mean, we're just one company, so this is not science, but the example shows that it's a big shift in the market. It's not, we haven't tried to do anything else. We haven't reached out to the ICT companies. They are coming to us. And when they are coming to us, I'm sure they're also coming to all our colleagues in the industry. And I really see a big need and also a lot of energy and money actually invested in making sure that the generalist ICT companies and also the other private sector like e-commerce and banking and all these big activities going on with an increase in accessibility knowledge. So I look very positive on the future. I think in 2030, I think we will have a solid industry where accessibility is not only a specialist competence, but hopefully a mainstream competence that everyone gets into their curriculum in the university. Everyone is taught at least basic accessibility so that the next generation's designers and content managers know accessibility from the start, because that's the only way this can be sustainable.
Yeah, thanks, Susanna. And for many years also accessibility, we have tried to promote the idea of accessibility as a synonym of quality in the development or in the web development. So this is also connecting very well with the main objective of the Accessibility project, that is really to raise awareness about the accessibility of ICT products and services in different sectors. And today we are covering the e-learning part of it. So I will thank you, Susanna. Thank you to all speakers. I will move to the wrap up section in the last 4 minutes of our workshop. Really, I would like to thank you all our speakers, Loredana, František, Susanna, and Radek, for the outstanding contribution to the workshop, really from the user's perspective of Loredana and František to the legislation, policy, and standardization of Susanna, and then really the strategies on how to make it happen, to make accessible e-learning happen, that Radek has explained to us. It has been a very coherent way of showing all the attendees a little bit different perspective on the e-learning of e-learning platforms. Really, I would like to thanks to ONCE Foundation for supporting the organization of the workshop. Also, my colleague Kasia and the communication team at Digital Europe for contributing with the dissemination on material and also the communication actions. And I have seen that Antonio has just published information about the forum. Please do not forget to join our forum of the Accessibility Project to follow up on the workshop and to be part of the discussion on the accessibility of different ICT technologies. I also would like to inform you that that this workshop is the first one of a series of 3. So next workshop on the context of the Accessibility Project will be on teleworking on the 27th of April. We will be disseminating everything through our social networks and the website. And to all of our attendees and participants, thank you for attending the workshop. It has been a real pleasure to be the moderator, and really I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Have a very good day and see you soon. Bye.